On today's Locked On Vikings, you all made me answer for my Sam Darnold tag and trade pessimism. Let me explain myself. It's the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate you all so very, very much. My hashtag everydayers. It's Town Hall Tuesday. That means I'm taking your questions as submitted to me via the Google form, which can be found in the show notes to any episode of Locked On Vikings. If you ever have a question, just shoot it in there, and I always get around to them on Tuesdays. You can also send me an email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. And here's a new thing. You can send me a hot take. I've decided that I want to try something new here for these Town Hall 2. We're changing the name. We're changing the format. We're doing everything. All right. A couple of times on... back on Twitter, I used to have some fun with like, hey, send me a hot take anonymously, DM it to me, and I'll put it out there, but I'll protect your identity. And I got some of the wildest stuff, and I wanted to try it here, and boy, it worked. So at the end of the show, we're going to go over your hot takes, and some of these are scorchers. Very excited for it. So first off, though, we'll get to our questions like normal. The first one comes from David Kahn, who asks, how would the timing of a tag and trade work? Would it just be a single announcement, or first the tag, then wait a couple days, then the trade? A lot of you had tag and trade questions, so we're going to go over a couple of them. But in terms of the timing, so they can the franchise tag window is open. It opened last week. It is going to stay open through March 4th. Once March 4th passes, this is no longer a thing. They can't tag him. So officially, the tag happens and then the trade happens. Now, you can go to the combine and two teams can just agree in principle and say, "Hey, yeah, we're gonna tag him," or we're gonna do that trade. And that's actually the timing of how the Matt Stafford Jared Goff trade happened. As the first example that comes to mind, like a few years ago, happened on like February 21st or something like that. Like happened like before free agency. The Lions and Rams just got together. They had that talk and they agreed to do it. They couldn't process it until the first day of the league year, but they could handshake on it and agree in principle. So in terms of when you're going to find the news, it could very well be that tomorrow the Vikings tag Sam Darnold and announce they're trading him to the Jets, and like that's it. That is not how it has to happen, though. The franchise tag has to be done by March 4th. If that happens and another trade is not, and the corresponding trade isn't in place, it probably means that they're trying to tag him and then shop him. And that kind of torpedoes your leverage really hard because everyone knows you're trying to get rid of him. But that goes more to the few questions, but it could be a single announcement. If it isn't, it means that they kind of did one before they had the next one locked down and they just like decided to accept that risk. Austrian Vikings fan says, on the show, you continuously speak about how unrealistic a Sam Darnold tag and trade would be. Don't you think a desperate team like the Raiders or Giants would trade a second round pick for him? So the actual value of Sam Darnold is different than the like practical economic trade price you're going to get. In terms of what he is worth to a team, what is a quarterback that's that's a starting level quarterback with some volatility and maybe some risk that you don't know if he's going to be as good as he was on his old team. Like whatever package that is, if you want to say that's worth a second round pick, all right, sure. But what he'll actually fetch in a trade is different because of leverage and negotiation. Like economics is a weird thing and it takes place in these contexts, which is why I cite economic concepts all the time on this. It's a market. It behaves like a market. The principles that apply to the market for strawberries, the market for eggs that's in the news, the market for anything absolutely applies in NFL trade and free agency conversations, and even in the draft in a less direct way. It's an auction market. Don't get me started. But the second round pick is too much, not because I don't think Sam Darnold is like that good of a player. That's sure. That's a perfectly appropriate value, maybe even more, but it depends on how many years of control you get. So trading for Sam Darnold on the tag gets you 1 year of control, and a team like the Raiders or the Giants wants more. In fact, the next question, the other MR Dunce asks, Sam Darnold tag and trade value. I feel like nobody talks about how a team trading for Sam on the franchise tag is taking a much smaller risk with him on a 1 year deal versus the 3 year deal they will likely have to sign him to if he hits free agency. Wouldn't this incentivize teams to trade for him? I actually think it's the opposite. I think teams are more interested in a 3 year commitment for him, not a 1 year deal where then you could get bent over a barrel if he simply repeats the year he just had. And you have all the evidence in front of you that he was going to be able to do that, but then he doesn't do. And then he does, and for whatever reason you didn't buy in when it was still reasonable to do so, and now he's going to get a gigantic contract. You could get a much better deal right now, and I think that it's much closer to that. So put it this way: you are the Raiders or the Giants or the Rams, and you're looking at Sam Darnold, and you say, okay, if we trade for him, what are we paying him, right? Well, you have to have the $41 million or whatever the tag is. You have to have that as part of it, and that's all fully guaranteed. So congratulations, 41 is already fully guaranteed. But okay, we're going to do a 3 year deal, $120 million, something like that. So that's about on that, and we're going to guarantee at least that much anyways. All right, sure. But it gives Sam Darnold a lot of negotiating leverage to say there is absolutely no reason he doesn't have to take a deal he's 100% in love with. Because he's about to get paid $41 million for a 1 year deal, and he gets all the power in that negotiation. Opposed to free agency, Sam Darnold still has a lot of leverage, but that's because he's playing teams against each other, and that's a market that teams are a lot more comfortable in, I think. But I don't think Sam Darnold needs to do the 1 year deal thing anymore. I think teams respect him. Have come to respect. Sounds like his market's going to be robust. And to me, that tells me that teams have come to respect him as a guy that you're going to sign to a multi-year deal. So you're not going to pay a second round pick for the privilege of paying a guy also $40 million. That's pretty rare to see, like TJ Hawkinson style. And even that was tempered, right? That was like a second round value for a tight end contract that like immediately aged really great. Like that was all pretty like tampered down in terms of we paid draft picks and cap money. For a quarterback to pay a second rounder and then, $40 million a year, all that stuff. I think most teams are going to be much happier to just let that hit free agency and go that way and not play ball with the Vikings when they say, hey, we're thinking about doing a tag and trade. Would you be interested? And that's the order of operations here. And that's the thing that a lot of people miss. Yeah, in Madden, you can click tag and then you can go to the trade menu. But in the NFL, you're not going to hit that. You're not going to click that tag button until you know there will be trade partners. And you can't know that there will be trade partners if they're going to go, dude, you're going to tag him and then make us buy that? Yeah, no way, dude. Good luck. And if everybody tells you no, you got to say, all right, we're going to let him go. Plus, after you put in all those like leverage considerations, such as, the negotiating leverage of being on the tag and kind of inheriting that lack of flexibility that this must be this year, you must have this much guaranteed now. It just gives you fewer options. You can't do roster bonus stuff. You can't do all kinds of, the stuff that teams love to do to make the salary cap hits work a little bit better. There has to be all this guaranteed salary that can maybe turn into signing bonus, but it can't turn into like roster bonus. Like it's tough. Plus the leverage Darnold has over both the Vikings and the trading team by saying, hey, if I don't want to play ball on this, I'm just going to stick the Vikings with the tag and they're going to be like caught holding the bag. And I'm fine with that. That gets everybody a little bit too motivated to take a deal. And the Vikings especially, who don't want to be caught holding the bag, are going to be too motivated to take a deal. And other teams are going to know that, and they're going to be able to get away with lowballing them. That's just the way the environment works. If you want to say the other teams are desperate for a quarterback, nah, they can say, like, if you're the Raiders or the Giants, you can say, yeah, whatever. Maybe we'll go trade for Matt Stafford. Maybe we'll sign, 1 year of Aaron Rodgers and we'll limp through that and get to a better quarterback draft next year. We got options, right? Those teams have options. If the Vikings get caught with the franchise tag sitting in their lap, they don't have options. And they don't want that. Other teams are going to know that, and they're going to be able to lowball them. It's just not a friendly market. So I don't think here's my ultimate Sam Darnold tag and trade thing. I don't think tagging and trading him gets you a better draft pick than the compensatory pick you would get if you let him walk. And it sounds like the Vikings agree because they're just going to let him walk. They've been pretty vocal about that. And unless something changes between now and then, the way that they've been talking, he's going to hit free agency. They haven't really been coy about it. One more about Darnold. K. Nels asks, how does Matthew Stafford's trade request impact Darnold's free agency market? This is interesting. So it adds the Rams to the market, assuming Stafford doesn't get something done and go back, right? So if Matt Stafford gets traded, it takes some team out of there and it replaces them with the Rams. That is a team that has a roster that they maybe want to, have a serious quarterback around. They don't want to just pull a total random. They don't want to pull Jameis Winston out of the catacombs and hope they can live through a year with that, right? They want somebody that has shown that they can win a lot of games, have a lot of explosion, work in this scheme. It's a match made in heaven to me. And so I think it adds to Sam Darnold's market a really, really motivated suitor. K-Nell says, I'd assume neither player wants to go to a rebuilding team, and there seems to only be a few teams that will be good fits for both guys. But one of those teams that's good fits for both guys is the Rams. So take a penny, leave a penny, right? And so I think it favors Sam Darnold quite a bit to add the Rams to that. Just throwing him in and having other teams negotiating trades, or just having another team that you can say, hey, we're also negotiating a trade with these guys, also kind of hurts Sam Darnold. If you're going to, and it hurts the Vikings if you're going to try to do tags and trades too, because everybody can just say, hey, this situation is super bunk. I'm going to go take this really nice Matt Stafford contract and go take the sure thing. And they can leverage that against you. Okay. I've got a few more questions and then we're going to get to your hot takes here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. It's Town Hall Tuesday. That means I am hearing your questions, hearing your ridiculously irresponsible opinions. The other daddy asks, Darasaw timeline. It's not a question. The question's coming, I promise. I feel he should be ready to go week 1. When compared to TJ Hawkinson, the injury happened a few weeks earlier in the season. And if I recall, Hawk had to wait a month to get surgery because of swelling. Am I wrong here? I thought that Darasaw's surgery came 3 weeks instead of 4 after his injury or something like that, but it was kind of similar. But if you apply the same timeline, it puts him back around Halloween. And Hawkinson was possibly ready by, week 4, by the end of the PUP list, but that was aggressive. So I would take week 1. It's definitely possible for Christian Darasaw to be ready by week 1. It would be aggressive to predict that. We middle of the season is worst case scenario. That's the worst case scenario for Hawkinson was he would miss the whole year. Worst case scenario for Darasaw, barring a setback that becomes a whole new injury, is that it takes a full calendar year and it takes out half the season. So should be ready to go week 1 is a lot to me, but it's definitely in the cards. James Kunow asks, if I recall, you were the lowest on KOC among all the finalists for the Vikings job back in 2022. Based on how things have transpired, what do you think you've learned most / what were you wrong on back then, and what do you think you got right? Yeah, so I think the only thing I was really right about was to avoid Nathaniel Hackett. He was my lowest, and Nathaniel Hackett was a very clear trap. But otherwise, I was kind of all over the place. I think what I learned is, man, it is so hard to know about these guys. If they're not guys that were a head coach before, these relative unknowns, like Kevin O'Connell, that was in 1 year as an OC, a year and a half as an OC, and half that was interim. Guys like Dave Canales, guys like Sean McVay, who was a hot name, but was also not all that experienced compared to all of the guys. I mean, he was famously really young, right? Are really, really hard to predict and know. I'm really glad that I was humble about that. If you go listen to the way that I talked about it back then, I was okay, this is the guy that I don't really like. And my reasoning was pretty vague. It was basically surely McVay's tree has been picked clean by now and we're getting the bottom of the barrel, right? Like that was my idea, that like surely there isn't another quality guy on that tree. But my tune changed a lot when I talked to Jordan Rodriguez at the Super Bowl that year. I was at the Super Bowl that January that the Rams were in, and I talked to Jordan Rodriguez, who covers the Rams, and I just asked, like, okay, what's the deal with this guy? And what she told me from an insider perspective was like, oh, I get the vision now, that it's not about him just being a schemer. I don't really respect the, like, let's just hire the OC with no leadership experience, but leadership was really a part of it with Kevin O'Connell. We just didn't know about it yet. And that really sold me in a way, but I'm also really, really glad that I didn't like walk into that season expecting failure, I'm glad I opened my heart and my mind for a chance for my very vague and nebulous prediction to be proven wrong. I think it would have been really, really dumb to be like super serious about that. So I'm glad I wasn't. Camilla from Brazil asks, what are the odds of the Vikings playing in Brazil in week one? I don't know about the week one thing, if Brazil's always going to be week one, but so here is the deal. Apparently the Chargers are going to be the team, and the Chargers do have the Vikings at home this year. So the Vikings could be one of those teams. So it's up to the Chargers who they take, which game they decide to put in Brazil. The Vikings have been very receptive to international stuff. They love doing the London thing. I don't know if, like, as a business, they love doing the London thing. I think the players and coaches could probably do without it, but as a business, the Wilfs have loved doing that. So they're a very receptive franchise to it. The odds just blankly, flatly, are 1 in 9. The Chargers have 9 home opponents, and the Vikings are one of them. But being an AFC team or an AFC NFC matchup means that, because that's a little less important, like you don't want to bring Chargers Chiefs to Brazil unless you want that to be the equalizer. And teams have done that, where they bring like a really good opponent to the international game and hope that it's an equalizer, right? Or what a lot of teams will do is they'll bring a cross-conference opponent because that's not as important to tiebreakers. So I think the Vikings are a pretty good idea for the Chargers, but they also play the Eagles cross-conference. That would be a really good one to take to try to get an equalizer against the defending champs, the Commanders. Those are the 3 NFC teams that the Chargers will play at home. Or, they could try to bring the Chiefs and shake that matchup up a little bit because they haven't been able to win it. It's not Kevin. It's definitely not Kevin. Asks, with 4 projected picks, the Vikings have the lowest total of draft capital in the NFL. Would drafting a running back make sense for a team that also needs to address the interior of both lines while dealing with a collection of circumstances that have left their top 4 cornerbacks and 2 starting safeties all eligible for free agency? You forgot that free agency adds players too. So it totally makes sense, because like a lot of those needs, like they could enter by draft day, running back could be the most glaring need. They still need a starter. They let Aaron Jones walk, right? Like they either need to bring him back or get a new starter. So that could be the only position that they don't have a starter. They could bring in a guard in free agency, couple of corners, like do the whole. They got a lot of money, and that's actually a plan that I don't hate. Leaning on the draft there at 24, I'm going to be honest. The running backs to me don't feel like first round running backs. But my standard for that's pretty high, but it just doesn't feel right to me. But, if that ends up being the only, if they end up in that such a luxurious position because of what they do in free agency, like they could absolutely play it that way. And then I wouldn't bat an eye. Also definitely not Kevin asks, how does a Florida man get used to the Midwest cold? Thicken up, dude. Come on now. Get good. Like it's a skill issue. Layers. Wear layers and be tough. Come on. I say it was 75 in LA today. I hope that doesn't make anybody mad. If you are, just wait, because I got some takes that you are going to be able to get real mad at. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Moving right on along here, the Locked On Vikings podcast. It's time for your hot take. So what I want, and I'm going to keep this going. I'm going to leave this Google Doc up. And if you want to give me a hot take, give me a hot take. But the deal is, okay, I will protect your anonymity. I ask you what you want to be called. Give me an alias that nobody will recognize. Dear Abby style. And I will say the take for you, and you don't have to be attached to it all. You can put it out in the ether and find peace, and we can all make fun of the take. We're going to start a little bit small here. Somebody from St. Paul says, Blake Brandel is a quality starting guard when Darisaw is playing. A quality starting guard. That's a pretty hot take, but I do think that it's not too crazy outside the realm of possibility, because the first 8 games when we did have Darisaw, we didn't talk about Brandel much at all. And in fact, the whole O-line we talked about as this strength of the team and as one of the surprises of the entire season. And then things fell apart for a bunch of reasons, including, but not limited to, Darisaw's injury. Sure. But I'm going to push back on the more reasonable part here. If you want to call him a quality starting guard, that's what this segment is for. But the when Darisaw is playing thing, I don't think is a valid enough excuse for Brandel, because the problems he had, it's there were problems that were his fault. For example, passing off stunts. He always would overcommit to the crasher. He would always turn his hips, turn his eyes, get caught chasing it. He would chase the crasher. You're not supposed to do that. That lets a looper in. Thing is, Darisaw was so good that when the looper was coming that way and he didn't have help from Brandel, he could still make the play. So he would paper over Blake Brandel's problems. That's not being a quality starting guard. That's just being a placeholder and having a player that's so good, he can make a non-starting quality guard look like a starting quality guard. And therefore, you could hypothesize that Blake Brandel could be replaced by any, Dakota Dozier out there and still look good because Darisaw is so good. So I think the premise kind of falls apart here, but I also just think it was Blake Brandel has issues at playing O-line that need to be addressed, or he needs to be replaced. Bar none. Whoever is next to him, if you can paper it over, okay, sure, but that doesn't fix the innate issues inside the player. Tyler Fiveness, because that's one more. Side note, Girls 5 of a good show. Canceled too soon. One of the funniest comedic musical moments I've ever seen in that show. If you know, you know. Blake Cashman is the least replaceable player the Vikings have on defense, and I'd let Grenard and Van Ginkel both walk before him. That's a scorcher. I'm feeling it. I respect this one. I don't think I can go there with Grenard with you. I think Grenard was the true linchpin of the Vikings defense, and everything was really, really focused on him getting production. And that's why he led the team in pressures and sacks and all that. And, of course, Van Ginkel, such an awesome Swiss Army knife, but put it this way. I want to know, and I'm not accusing, I'm asking, if Van Ginkel was the one who got hurt and Blake Cashman stayed healthy all season, would I be getting this submission but the other way around? Is it just because he's the one we saw need to be replaced by a backup? But I guess when you use the word replaceable, and yeah, if Van Ginkel gets hurt and Dallas Turner pops in, that's a better replacement plan than moving a safety to linebacker and having him get washed out of run plays. Which happened. So I guess, yeah, because the linebacker depth is worse than the edge depth, that plays into this take. So yeah, I'm going to give it to you. LF says Minnesota. It's not the same LF that's in the thing. It's not what you think. He said Minnesota Vikings select or acquire undrafted first team all Big 12 center Leaf Fontanu to replace Garrett Bradbury. I don't know who this player plays for. I've never seen this name in my life. You could be making it up for all I know, and it's not the same LF. But boy, if Garrett Bradbury lost his job to an undrafted rookie, I think there are a lot of people that have been waiting for 8 years now. No, that's way too much. 6 years now to finally take their victory lap, that they weren't wrong to put 100% of their faith into a single game PFF grade in the first week of 2019, or a couple of them in the first month of 2019. I think ever since the PFF grades were bad, a lot of people made up their minds on Bradbury and basically refused to listen when he visibly got better and better and better and better every week. And now I think he's a league average center. That's cheap. he had like a volatility in the Zimmer days where he was really, really good at some things and really, really bad at other things. Now I think he's kind of mellowed out. They don't ask him to do super, super crazy stuff anymore, and it's helped him cover up those weaknesses, and he'll get bowled over as much as anyone's center does. Everybody's center is small. There's very few big centers in the league. Those guys are like Frank Ragnow when they make the Pro Bowl, and good for them. But most of the guys in the league are going to be smaller than the noses across from them. But boy, yeah, some people are just waiting. They're just waiting. They were never wrong, only early, right? Nope, sorry, you were wrong. I'm never going to quit it. Oatmeal Raisin Cookie Fan has, okay, I think this is the hottest one. Oatmeal Raisin Cookie Fan sent in a bunch, but I'm picking the one you had, which is a complete nuclear bomb, okay? I hope you all are sitting down. The wide receiver duo we have is too redundant, and I don't think they're a top 16 wide receiver duo because I do not think their skills complement one another. Oh, this did knock the wind out of me. Not thinking that Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison is a top half unit simply because of redundancy. Buck wild. Precisely what I was looking for. Thank you, Oatmeal Raisin Cookie Fan. Also, one of the takes was that Oatmeal Raisin Cookie is the best cookie. Not a hot take. You're just right. Oh boy. So I got to respond to this in two parts. Firstly, the idea of redundancy on wide receiver isn't a problem. They are kind of redundant with each other. They're both more downfield threats. They're more about, route running finesse and getting open intermediately. They're not really you don't really want to make them like after catch guys. You're not throwing these guys bubble screens and manufacturing targets on jet sweeps for them very much. Like they can do that, but that's not the point of them. You want them running posts and digs and stuff downfield. But having two of those guys rocks. You don't need one of every flavor. This isn't Pokemon. You don't got to catch them all. So redundancy isn't an issue, but even if you think that they're like slightly anti-synergistic, like let me attempt to do a basketball thing. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Timberwolves a couple years ago, when they went to the conference finals, didn't they have two bigs? And that was like supposed to be a redundancy, but it like kind of worked, right? They can like you can work that. So even a little bit anti-synergistically, just to get these guys out of like the top 10, you have to start arguing that like Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams was better. Like for the Jets to start, or for the Raiders to start the season, or like DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. And like if you want to argue, Kupp and Nakua, if you want to argue, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, like, okay, we can have that argument. And, I'm sure you can find some stuff, but like, man, we're talking like Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs being better than this. You got to come up with some absolutely hideous Calvin Ridley takes to like even begin to justify this. And you have to come up with that like 6 times. Not top 16 is a wild number. But I'll stop dunking on you. We'll go back to Kevin, Iowa edition. I actually do believe this is a Kevin. I think this is just a Kevin that's getting in on the bit, which I love, who has a great one. I love this, who says, I think the concept of a team coming in pissed off is stupid, or at least doesn't track with me. I just don't see how a professional athlete wants to win more after a loss than any other time. I think that there's something to it. Every player talks about it. Like everybody who's actually played the game testimonially, like very consistent about this. And for us who have not played the game, we got to just like respect that. But I think media just assumes that after a bad loss, that team's going to come in playing pissed off. And that ain't always the case. Sometimes that thing breaks you. Maybe that happened to the Vikings after they lost to Detroit and then they came out flat in the wild card. We know that happened to the Bears after they lost to Washington on that Hail Mary debacle. They lost the next 9, and guys were coming out in the media and saying like, yeah, it just hasn't been the same since that day. They didn't come out pissed off, right? They came out dejected. But coming out pissed off is a thing that like players feel. Put it this way. Every professional athlete is motivated, but some are more motivated than others. Among the scale of professional athlete motivations, a player who plays angry ball comes out pissed might play with just a little more vinegar, right? Like might just play a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, one more play of high energy. one more play before everybody has to rotate out. And that could end up generating some kind of advantage in the game, even if it's a slight one. So I'm not going to go with you and say that it's stupid and that it's nothing, but it's probably overblown. I think, let me put it this way and get a reasonable version of the same take. Coming in pissed off is a thing, but NFL analysts are really bad at identifying when it's going to happen. I think we can probably all get on board with that one. And that's where we'll leave this. So let me know what you think. If you want me to just keep doing like questions for all 3 segments of these Town Hall Tuesdays, and everybody's like, yeah, the hot take thing was fun, but just go back to questions, like, let me know. I want to hear it. But if you like this kind of stuff, throw one into the doc. Okay. It's a safe place. You will not be identified. Nothing will be, nobody can find who you are. All right. Unless you like literally tell me to, then I guess I will. But why would you do that? Okay. Use the blanket of anonymity and tell me your darkest secrets. And I'll get around to them next Tuesday. I'll see you all for that. And as always, Skull.